My name is Lorraine Mitchell, and I am 73 years old. I live in a small yellow house on the edge of Beaumont, Texas, where the summer heat bakes the earth so hard it cracks like old porcelain. The roses I planted with my husband Raymond 38 years ago still bloom every spring outside my kitchen window. Every morning I wake up and look at those roses and I talk to him. I tell him about the birds that came to the feeder. I tell him about the neighbors. I tell him about Claire. But lately when I talk to him about Claire, I cannot finish the sentence. Because Claire is gone. And I believe the same man who took Raymond from me took my daughter too. What I am about to tell you is not easy. There were days during this nightmare when I could not get out of bed. Days when I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator and cried until there was nothing left inside me. Days when I wondered if God had simply forgotten my address. But I am still here. And the truth is still here. And I made a promise to Raymond in those final months of his life that I would never let the truth be buried. Even if it costs me everything. I need to start at the beginning because the beginning matters. The beginning is where you understand what we had before it was all taken away. I was 22 years old when I met Raymond Mitchell at a county fair in Jefferson County, Texas. It was August, hot and sticky the way only East Texas can be. And I was standing in line for lemonade in a yellow sundress my mother had sewn for me. Raymond was behind me in line, tall and quiet with honest brown eyes and hands that were already callous from work at his father's cattle ranch. He said, "Excuse me, ma'am, you dropped your ribbon." I had not dropped any ribbon. I think he just wanted a reason to talk to me. I fell in love with him right there in that lemonade line. We married 14 months later in a small Baptist church with wildflowers in my hair, and Raymond crying before I even made it halfway down the aisle. His mother whispered to mine that he had been crying since morning. That was Raymond. He never hid what he felt. He wore his heart on the outside, exposed and honest and completely unashamed. We built our life together slowly and carefully, the way you build something you intend to last forever. Raymond worked the ranch his father left him. I taught elementary school for 31 years. We were not wealthy people, but we were rich in the ways that matter. We had land, we had health, we had each other, and most importantly we had Claire. Claire Elizabeth Mitchell was born on a rainy Tuesday in October, and from her very first breath she had her father's eyes and my stubbornness. She was the kind of child who collected stray cats and argued with teachers and cried at sad movies but pretended she was not crying. She was fierce and tender at the same time, like a rosebush. Beautiful but with thorns if you grabbed her wrong. Raymond called her his Texas wildflower. I called her my whole heart walking around outside my body. She grew up on that ranch, riding horses before she could properly read, helping Raymond mend fences on weekends, sitting with me in the kitchen learning to make the biscuits my grandmother taught me. We were a close family. Not perfect but close. The kind of close where you knew every creak of each other's voice and every shadow behind each other's eyes. When Claire went to college in Austin, Raymond and I missed her so fiercely it was almost physical. But we were proud. She was studying business, sharp as a tack, full of plans and energy. She called us every Sunday without fail. She came home for every holiday. She was still our girl even with 300 miles between us. Then she met Daniel Whitmore. She brought him home for Thanksgiving when she was 24. I remember the day clearly because I had been cooking since 5 in the morning, and the house smelled of cornbread and roasting turkey, and the cinnamon candles I always lit for the holidays. Daniel Whitmore walked through my front door, and immediately I understood why Claire was so taken with him. He was extraordinarily handsome. Not in a flashy way but in a quiet, composed way, dark hair, sharp jaw, warm smile that reached his eyes just enough to seem genuine. He was 30 years old, already successful in real estate development, wore clothes that fit perfectly without looking like he was trying too hard. He shook Raymond's hand with both of his. He complimented my cooking 3 times before he even sat down. He helped clear the dishes without being asked. He was, in every visible way, exactly what a mother hopes her daughter finds. Raymond liked him immediately. Raymond was a good judge of character and he liked Daniel, which settled something in me. But there was one moment during that Thanksgiving dinner that I never forgot. It happened quickly, easily missed if you were not paying attention. Claire accidentally knocked her glass of sweet tea, and it spilled across the tablecloth toward Daniel's side. In the half-second before he composed himself into a helpful, laughing response, there was something in his face. A flash. Cold and sharp like a blade catching light. It was gone before I could name it. I told myself I had imagined it. I wish I had not told myself that. They married 2 years later in a beautiful outdoor ceremony on our ranch. Claire wore Raymond's mother's pearl earrings and a dress so white it glowed in the afternoon sun. Daniel cried at the altar, which made every woman in attendance melt completely. Raymond walked Claire down the aisle holding her arm with both hands like he was giving away the most precious thing he had ever held. Because he was. The first years of their marriage seemed happy. Daniel's business was growing. They bought a beautiful home in Houston. Claire got a job with a marketing firm she loved. They seemed to fit together well. She was warm and impulsive, he was measured and strategic. She softened him. He steadied her. They visited us on the ranch regularly. Daniel would help Raymond with small repairs, would sit on the porch with him in the evenings drinking sweet tea and talking about land prices and cattle markets. Raymond told me more than once that Daniel was a good man. That Claire had chosen well. I almost believed it completely. Almost. Because there were small things. Tiny things that individually meant nothing but collectively made a sound. Like distant thunder you hear before you see any clouds. The way Daniel sometimes finished Claire's sentences in a way that was not affectionate but corrective. The way Claire would glance at him before answering certain questions, as if checking for permission. The way she stopped talking about her job after their 3rd year of marriage. The way she lost weight gradually, steadily. In a way she explained away as dieting but which left shadows under her eyes that dieting does not cause. I mentioned it to Raymond once. I said something feels different with Claire. Raymond was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Lorraine, I have been thinking the same thing. But when I ask her she says everything is fine." "What do we do?" I asked him. "We stay close," he said. "We make sure she always knows the door is open. We do not push her away by pushing too hard." That was Raymond's wisdom. Patient, steady. Always thinking of what Claire needed rather than what we needed. I wish he had lived long enough to see how right his instincts were. Raymond was diagnosed with a heart condition in the spring of his 68th year. The doctor called it hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a thickening of the heart muscle that made it work too hard. It was manageable with medication, the doctor said. With lifestyle adjustments, Raymond could live comfortably for many more years. He was not dying. Let me be clear about that. In the spring when they diagnosed him, Raymond Mitchell was a healthy, active man who walked 2 miles every morning and still rode horses on weekends. His heart condition was serious but controlled. This is important. Please remember this. Daniel was very attentive during Raymond's diagnosis. He drove us to 2 specialist appointments in Houston. He researched the condition extensively, or said he did, bringing printouts of medical articles to family dinners and asking the doctors detailed questions that impressed everyone including Raymond's cardiologist. He seemed genuinely concerned. Looking back now, I understand what he was actually doing. He was learning. Raymond passed away 18 months after his diagnosis. The official cause of death on the certificate said cardiac arrest secondary to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The doctor who signed it was a young physician who had only treated Raymond twice, and who seemed to accept Daniel's detailed accounting of Raymond's recent symptoms without much question. I was devastated in a way I cannot fully put into words. 38 years. 38 years of the same hands reaching for mine in the dark. The same voice saying good morning. The same presence so woven into my daily life that losing him felt like losing half of my own body. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I sat in his chair and wore his old flannel shirt because it still smelled like him. Claire came and stayed with me for 2 weeks, holding me while I cried. Sleeping in the bed next to me because neither of us could bear the silence. Daniel was there too, of course. Handling arrangements, managing paperwork, speaking to Raymond's lawyer about the estate with an efficiency that I found comforting at the time. I had no reason to question it. Not yet. The grief of losing Raymond was so enormous that it took almost 6 months before I began to surface enough to notice things clearly again. The first thing I noticed was the land. Raymond's ranch was 240 acres of East Texas land that had been in his family for 3 generations. It was not worth millions, but it was worth something. The last appraisal had valued it at just over $400,000. Raymond had always said that land would go to Claire someday, and through Claire to any grandchildren we might have. 3 months after Raymond's death, Daniel began mentioning selling the ranch. At first he framed it as concern for me. Lorraine, managing that property alone is too much for a woman your age. The upkeep, the taxes, the liability. Raymond would not want you burdened. Then he framed it as financial wisdom. The market is strong right now. You could sell and invest the money and live very comfortably for the rest of your life. We can help you find a nice smaller place. Then he brought papers. I do not know exactly what those papers were because when I asked Claire she changed the subject. But Daniel brought documents to 2 separate family dinners and both times Raymond's name was on them with a signature line. Except Raymond had been dead for months. When I pointed this out, Daniel laughed and said it was old paperwork being updated, administrative things, nothing to worry about. But I worried. I called Raymond's lawyer, an old man named Gerald Hutchins who had known our family for 20 years. I asked Gerald if Daniel had been in contact with him. Gerald paused for a moment that felt too long and said he was not at liberty to discuss that without more context. He said, "Lorraine, if anything makes you uncomfortable, trust that feeling." 2 weeks later, Gerald Hutchins called me and said he was retiring and transferring all files to a new firm. The new firm I had never heard of. I later found out Daniel had referred Gerald's biggest client away from his practice 6 weeks before Gerald suddenly decided to retire. The phone call that broke me came on a Wednesday morning in November. It was a hospital in Houston. A nurse with a careful voice who told me there had been an accident. Claire had been in a car crash on a highway outside the city. She was in critical condition. My legs stopped working. I sat down on the kitchen floor right there and I could not get up. My neighbor Betty heard me cry out through the open window and came running. The drive to Houston was 4 hours. Daniel called me halfway there. His voice cracked and devastated, saying the doctors were doing everything they could. He sounded like a man destroyed by fear. He sounded exactly the way a guilty man practices sounding. Claire survived the initial crash but sustained severe internal injuries. She was in surgery for 6 hours. Raymond's wildflower, my fierce tender girl, lay in an ICU bed surrounded by machines while I sat in a waiting room and prayed with everything I had left. She spent 11 days in that hospital. I was there every single day. Daniel was there most days, charming the nurses, speaking knowledgeably with the doctors, bringing coffee for the staff. Everyone adored him. The nurses called him devoted. One doctor told me I was lucky to have such a caring son-in-law. I smiled and said nothing, because by day 4 in that hospital I had started to notice things. Daniel's questions to the doctors were very specific. He asked about medication interactions. He asked about the monitoring schedule. He asked which hours had the fewest nursing staff. He said he wanted to understand everything, so he could help with Claire's care at home. He was learning again. On day 9, Claire had a brief period of clarity in the afternoon when Daniel had stepped out. She grabbed my hand with surprising strength and looked at me with eyes that were frightened in a way that had nothing to do with the accident. "Mama," she whispered. I leaned close. The accident was not an accident. My blood turned to ice. Before I could respond, Daniel walked back into the room. Claire's face changed immediately, smoothed itself into something carefully neutral. She closed her eyes. I sat there holding her hand and smiling at Daniel, and feeling the most profound terror of my entire life. Claire came home from the hospital on a Thursday. She came to my home in Beaumont, not to Houston. She said she wanted to recover somewhere quiet. Daniel agreed with a warmth that seemed genuine. Visiting every weekend, bringing flowers, bringing groceries, being absolutely perfect. But Claire told me things during those weeks of recovery that I have never repeated until now. She told me in a low voice late at night when the house was quiet and we were certain Daniel was not nearby. She told me that Daniel had been slowly, systematically isolating her for years. Subtle criticism that eroded her confidence. Control over money that left her financially dependent. Manufactured arguments that kept her away from friends. Small emergencies that always seemed to occur when she planned to visit me or Raymond. She told me she had been planning to leave him. That she had a small amount of money hidden. That she had spoken to a lawyer. She told me that the week before the accident Daniel had found her hidden money. "Mama," she whispered on the 4th night, "I do not think Daddy died of a heart attack. I think Daniel did something. I found a receipt in his jacket 8 months ago. A pharmacy in a town 40 miles from here. Medications that had no reason to be there." I confronted him and he laughed and said I was paranoid. But I kept the receipt. I hid it. And then a month later he started talking about Daddy's land and showing me papers, and I got so scared. "Where is the receipt now?" I asked. She looked at me with Raymond's eyes. "In the house in Houston," she said. "In the lining of my winter coat in the guest closet. I was afraid to take it with me when I left because he checks my bags." 2 weeks after Claire came to stay with me, she had a medical episode in the night. Rapid heartbeat, confusion, vomiting. I called the ambulance immediately. The emergency doctor said it looked like a reaction to her pain medication. I asked if someone else could have tampered with her medication. The doctor looked at me for a long moment and said he could run additional tests if I wanted. I said, "Please run every test you have." They found traces of digoxin in Claire's blood. Digoxin is a heart medication. In correct doses it is life-saving. In excess it causes exactly what Claire had experienced, and in higher doses it causes cardiac arrest. The same way Raymond had died. The emergency doctor was a young woman named Dr. Sarah Okafor, who had sharp eyes and an extremely careful manner. When she told me about the digoxin, she watched my face very closely. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said quietly, "does your daughter have any reason to be taking digoxin?" "No," I said. "She has never had a heart condition." "Has she been in contact with anyone who takes this medication?" "Raymond took digoxin for his heart condition," I said. "He has been dead for over a year." Dr. Okafor was quiet for a moment. "And before his death," she asked carefully, "did anyone else have access to his medications?" Daniel Whitmore's face appeared in my mind like a photograph. What happened next moved both slowly and terrifyingly fast. Dr. Okafor reported her findings to hospital administration, who contacted law enforcement. A detective named Frank Reyes from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department came to speak with me 2 days later. A large, quiet man with a methodical way of speaking that reminded me of Raymond. I told him everything. Every instinct I had suppressed. Every moment that had felt wrong. Claire's whispered words in the hospital. The receipt she had described. Daniel's questions to the doctors. Gerald Hutchins suddenly retiring. The papers with Raymond's name on them months after Raymond's death. Detective Reyes listened without interrupting and took careful notes. Then he asked if I still had Raymond's remaining medications from before his death. I did. I had never thrown them away. I had not been able to bring myself to clear Raymond's things completely. His medications were still in the bathroom cabinet in the small amber bottles exactly as he had left them. Detective Reyes asked permission to take them for testing. 3 weeks later he called me. Raymond's digoxin bottle contained significantly higher concentration levels than the prescribed dosage. Someone had added extra digoxin to the bottle. Over weeks of taking what he believed was his normal medication, Raymond's heart had been pushed past what it could bear. My husband had not died of his heart condition. He had been murdered. I want to pause here and tell you what that moment felt like because I think it is important. It felt like the ground opening. It felt like every memory of the past 2 years reshuffling in my mind simultaneously. Every moment replayed with the terrible new knowledge of what Daniel had been doing underneath the surface of his perfect, charming, devoted son-in-law performance. Raymond walking his 2 miles every morning not knowing his medication was killing him slowly. Raymond sitting on the porch with Daniel in the evenings drinking sweet tea, trusting him. Raymond walking Claire down the aisle and placing her hand in this man's hand. I went to the bathroom and I was sick. Then I washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. The same mirror Raymond had looked into every morning for 38 years. And I said out loud to my own reflection, "I am going to make this right, Raymond. I promise you I am going to make this right." Getting the receipt from the Houston house was the most frightening thing I have ever done. Detective Reyes advised me not to go myself. But he also explained that without a warrant, which required more evidence than they currently had, law enforcement could not retrieve it. If Claire formally requested access to her own belongings from her marital home, it was her legal right. Claire was still recovering, but her mind was clear. She called Daniel and told him she needed some of her winter clothes sent to Beaumont. She gave a careful, casual list that ended with the guest closet. Daniel said, "Of course, anything you need, sweetheart, I will bring them this weekend." He brought everything on the list except the winter coat. He said he could not find it. That told us everything we needed to know about what the receipt contained. Detective Reyes found another way. A former colleague of Daniel's, a man he had cheated out of a business deal 3 years earlier, came forward after hearing through community channels that Daniel was under investigation. This man had kept emails, financial records, evidence of Daniel systematically defrauding partners, and crucially, a conversation he had recorded during a confrontation with Daniel 2 years ago, in which Daniel, believing he had the upper hand, had said something extraordinary. In the recording, Daniel's voice was calm and almost amused. People who stand in the way of what I am building tend to have very bad luck. Raymond Mitchell is going to have very bad luck soon. Old men with heart conditions are so fragile. That recording, combined with the tampered medication and the digoxin in Claire's blood, was enough. Daniel Whitmore was arrested on a Tuesday morning outside his Houston office. Claire called me when it happened. She called me sobbing. Not from grief for Daniel but from the release of years of fear finally lifting all at once. She said, "Mama, they got him, they actually got him," and I sat down on the kitchen floor the same way I had sat down when they called about Raymond, except this time I was not falling, I was landing. I was finally landing after 2 years of freefall. The investigation that followed was thorough and devastating. Forensic accountants traced $400,000 that Daniel had already quietly moved from various accounts. Raymond's estate money that should have come to me and Claire, siphoned through shell companies Daniel had been constructing for 2 years. He had been preparing for Raymond's death long before Raymond died. They found the pharmacy receipt too. It had not been in the coat lining after all. Claire had actually sewn it into the hem of an old dress she almost never wore, her memory fuzzy from the trauma of the accident. When Detective Reyes brought a warrant and found it, it documented the purchase of pharmaceutical-grade digoxin from a compounding pharmacy using a false name. The surveillance footage from that pharmacy showed Daniel Whitmore clearly despite his baseball cap and sunglasses. He had not been careful enough. Arrogant men rarely are. The trial lasted 11 days. The courtroom in Beaumont was full every single day. People I had not seen in years came. Raymond's old friends from the ranching community. Parents of students I had taught decades ago. People who had never met Raymond or Claire but who came because some stories demand witnesses. I sat in the front row every day in my best blue dress, the one Raymond always said made my eyes look like the sky after rain. I watched Daniel Whitmore try to perform his innocence the same way he had performed his devotion for years. He was composed, articulate. He wept at strategic moments. His defense attorney was expensive and skilled and argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the digoxin could have come from anywhere, that Daniel was a grieving husband whose wife had been poisoned by an unknown person, and who was being railroaded by a grief-stricken mother-in-law looking for someone to blame. It was a compelling performance. It was not compelling enough. The prosecutor played the recording. Raymond Mitchell is going to have very bad luck soon. The jury heard those words and the courtroom went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that has weight. I looked at Daniel's face in that moment and saw the composure finally crack, just slightly, just enough. The same flash I had seen at my Thanksgiving table years ago when Claire spilled her sweet tea. There it was. The real man underneath. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Raymond Mitchell. Guilty of attempted murder in the case of Claire Mitchell Whitmore. Guilty of fraud and financial exploitation. Daniel Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, I did not cheer. I did not feel triumph. What I felt was something much quieter and much heavier. A grief that had been waiting underneath all the fear and the fighting finally allowed to rise to the surface. Raymond was still gone. Justice does not bring them back. I want you to understand that clearly. All the evidence and all the trials and all the verdicts in the world do not give you back the 38 years. They do not give you back the voice that said good morning every day for 4 decades. They do not give you back the man who cried before you even reached the altar because he loved you so completely he could not contain it. But they give you something. They give you the knowledge that the truth was stronger than the lie. That one small flash at a Thanksgiving table years ago, that instinct I almost buried, ultimately mattered. That Raymond's life and death were not reduced to a transaction in Daniel Whitmore's financial plan. Raymond Mitchell was seen. He was remembered. He was avenged. There is one more thing I have not told you yet. After the arrest but before the trial, Detective Reyes came to see me with something he said had been found during the search of Daniel's home office. It was a small USB drive taped underneath the bottom drawer of Daniel's desk. Hidden there not by Daniel but discovered when investigators removed the drawer entirely. The drive contained a single video file. Raymond had recorded it on his phone 4 months before his death and somehow transferred it to that drive, which we believe Claire had found and hidden in the office, not knowing what it contained, perhaps during one of her own frightened searches of Daniel's things. Detective Reyes handed me a printed transcript of the video rather than making me watch it cold. He said, "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband recorded this in March. He said he was recording it just in case." I sat in my kitchen with those printed pages and read Raymond Mitchell's last words to me. He had propped his phone against a stack of books on his desk the way our grandchildren did when they wanted to video call us. He was wearing his blue flannel shirt. He looked tired but alert. He said, "Lorraine, if you are reading this or watching this, something has happened to me that was not an accident. I have not told you because I did not want to frighten you and because I was not certain. But I am becoming more certain every day." He said, "Daniel Whitmore is not the man he appears to be. I have seen things in the past months that trouble me deeply. The questions he asks, the interest he takes in my medical care, the papers he brings that always seem just slightly wrong somehow. I am an old rancher, Lorraine, not a suspicious man by nature, but something is wrong." He said, "I hired a man to look into Daniel's background. His name is Carl Briggs and he works out of Beaumont. His number is in the back of my brown address book in the desk drawer. If something happens to me, call Carl Briggs," he said, "and then whatever you find, whatever the truth is, you fight. You know how to fight, Lorraine. You always have. You are the strongest woman I have ever known, and I need you to use that strength one more time. For Claire. Keep her safe." He paused and looked directly at the camera. He said, "I love you more than I have ever known how to say. Every single day for 38 years I have loved you that way. Take care of my roses." I called Carl Briggs the day after I watched the video. Carl Briggs was a retired police officer turned private investigator, 65 years old, with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead and a manner so calm it was almost medicinal. Raymond had hired him 3 months before his death. Carl had been investigating Daniel quietly and had compiled a substantial file. Previous business partners who felt defrauded, a former girlfriend who had reported harassment, financial inconsistencies going back years. Carl had tried to contact Raymond to share his findings and had learned Raymond had died. He had been sitting with that file not knowing what to do with it when I called. He said, "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband was a very smart man and he loved you and your daughter very much. I am sorry I was not faster." I said, "You are here now. That is what matters." Carl's file became a crucial part of the prosecution's case. The pattern of behavior, the history of manipulation, the evidence that Daniel Whitmore had been this person long before he met Claire, that our family had not been unlucky but targeted. Raymond, in the last months of his life, afraid and uncertain but never stopping, had built the foundation of his own justice. It has been 2 years since the verdict. Claire is healed now, physically completely, emotionally still on the journey, which is honest and right. She lives 20 minutes from me in a small house with a garden she is learning to tend. She is seeing a therapist who she says is helping her understand that what happened to her was not her fault, that none of the warning signs she missed were failures of intelligence, that charming manipulative men are designed specifically to fool people who love them. She comes to Sunday dinner every week without exception. We make biscuits from my grandmother's recipe. We drink sweet tea on the porch and watch the sun go down over the ranch that is still ours, that Daniel never got his hands on, that will pass to Claire exactly as Raymond always intended. Sometimes she is quiet for a long time and I let her be quiet. Sometimes she cries without warning and I hold her without asking questions. Sometimes she laughs so hard she spills her tea, and when she does I see Raymond's eyes in her face and my heart breaks and heals simultaneously. She calls me every Sunday morning before she comes. She never misses. During my darkest months I found strength in something Raymond used to say. A drowning person does not need someone to explain water to them. They need a hand. I decided to be that hand for others. There are women everywhere carrying unbearable weight in silence, fighting battles no one can see, surviving things no one should have to survive alone. I think about them often. I think about how the loneliest griefs are the ones that look perfectly fine from the outside. I established a small fund in Raymond's name through our local church, the Raymond Mitchell Memorial Fund for Families in Crisis. It is not large. It helps with practical things. Legal consultation fees for people who cannot afford them. Groceries for a family while a caregiver is in hospital. Transportation to court dates. Small things that matter enormously when you are in the middle of a storm, and every small obstacle feels unsurvivable. Raymond would have liked that. He was a practical man who believed in practical help. On Sunday mornings I still talk to Raymond at the rose bushes before Claire arrives. I tell him about the week. I tell him what is growing and what needs tending. I tell him about Claire, her progress, her laughter, her healing. I tell him that his wildflower is still wild, still blooming, still impossible to uproot. Last Sunday I told him the roses were the best they had ever been. I think he already knew. If you are reading this and something feels wrong in your family, in a relationship, in a situation others keep telling you is fine, please listen to that feeling. I spent years managing it, minimizing it, explaining it away out of love and hope and the very human need to believe the people closest to us are who we need them to be. Raymond trusted his instincts enough to record that video, to hire Carl Briggs, to build us a path out of the darkness, even while he was walking toward his own death without fully understanding it. Trust your instincts. Fight. And take care of your roses. In memory of Raymond Earl Mitchell, honest man, good father, beloved husband. His love was stronger than what was done to him. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are going through something similar, you are not alone. There are people fighting the same battle in different houses, different cities, different names. Stay strong. See you in the next story.